Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is my Radeon RX 590. It lacks regular driver updates in 2026, but it still offers solid value for money, costing almost the same as the slower RX 580 on the used market. An Nvidia GTX 1070 would wipe the floor with both, but that is a topic for another day. A few videos ago we tested what is AMD's best Polaris GPU in a handful of games under Windows 11, but some of you suggested trying SteamOS to iron out any compatibility quirks. While designed for handhelds, this Linux-based OS works great on AMD desktops too. It wouldn't be my first choice. Lighter Linux distributions may suit this older card much better, but SteamOS is probably the most well-known and heavily featured here on YouTube, so why not start with this? We've covered the installation before, but getting SteamOS on your desktop is as simple as downloading the image from the official site, creating a bootable USB with your software of choice, I used Rufus, and then booting from the USB when turning your PC on. You'll need an AMD GPU for now, but I recently read that Valve is working with Intel and Nvidia to make it work on any hardware. I was pleasantly surprised to see 007 First Light work out of the box. This won't launch under Windows 11, not without user tweaks, and even then it will crash a lot of the time. Maybe it will here too. I mean, I only played for half an hour today, but at the low settings it ran with at least 30 FPS, and it didn't freeze. It still looks pretty decent at low. Now of course what we gain here we lose elsewhere. For example, Battlefield 6 won't run as the anti-cheat cannot function on Linux, and GTA Online can't be played for similar reasons. At least we can still enjoy the excellent single player experience in GTA 5, the enhanced version of which will run nicely with the very high preset. But how does it compare to Windows 11? Well, I've featured the SteamOS gameplay on screen, but I'll have the comparative figures on display as well, so that we can see any differences. Now with GTA 5 we're going to be averaging 60 frames per second here in SteamOS with a 1% low of 49 and a 0.1% low of 44. It actually felt really smooth to play. Compared to Windows 11, build 25H2, we were seeing 67 frames per second with a 1% low of 55 and a 0.1% low of 53. So it was better in terms of performance, but it didn't feel any more smooth. I think SteamOS still did a good job of retaining decent consistency. When it comes to Counter-Strike 2 with a high preset, the RX 590 will run the game at 143 frames per second under SteamOS with a 1% low of 74 and a 0.1% low of 66. It was a very smooth experience. Now Windows 11 will actually once again output a better average by quite some margin here, 157 FPS. The 1% low was basically the same, 74. Where we noticed the biggest difference here though was with the overall smoothness, and with Steam the game was a lot more pleasant to play simply because it wasn't as stuttery. We saw some pretty hefty dips under Windows 11, dips which were quite off-putting at times. And I know I'm not the best player in the world, but sometimes the game would stutter and then it meant that I got wiped out. Whereas on SteamOS this problem didn't occur. I mean, I still got wiped out a lot because I'm pretty useless at Counter-Strike 2, but it wasn't because of the performance, it was just me. Unfortunately, Elden Ring does not share similar consistency with SteamOS in the RX 590, with the maximum preset here, which is, to be honest, probably a little high, but I wanted to push this thing. We saw 55 FPS. This is fine, but the 1 and 0.1% lows of 31 and 25 meant that the game was quite stuttery, and you can probably pick that up in the footage here. Compared to Windows, which actually averaged slightly less, 54 FPS, although still within margin of error territory, it made up for this with the percentile lows of 47 and 40, so this was a lot smoother. I then tried The Last of Us, which performed very similar on both operating systems. Under Steam, we were seeing 57 frames per second, a decent effort from the 590. This is with the low preset. The 1% low was 43 and the 0.1% low was 38. Now I think The Last of Us Part 1 Remastered still looks pretty good with this visual preset, though up close you are going to notice a few issues, or let's say lack of fidelity with textures and things like that, as expected from low options. With Windows, we saw about 0.3 more frames per second, so basically a non-existent difference here when actually playing, and the percentile lows were slightly improved. We are seeing 45 and 43 up from 43 and 38, but no discernible difference. If you didn't have the frame rate counter, you weren't counting frames, you wouldn't notice a difference when playing, put it that way. With Spider-Man Remastered, I have to say it felt pretty decent to play with both SteamOS and Windows 11. 70 frames per second from SteamOS here, a 1% low of 48 and a 0.1% low of 40 meant that the game remained fairly consistent when we were swinging our way through downtown Manhattan. Now with Windows 11 25H2 we saw 69 FPS, very nice, again within margin of error territory, just 1 frame per second less on average, but here once again the percentile lows were improved, 55 and 46 up from 48 and 40, so not worlds away, but a noticeable difference on paper nonetheless. Red Dead Redemption, the original version here, 1080p with the Ultra preset and FSR3 set to native AA. SteamOS produced a pretty respectable average of 77 frames per second with the 590, a 1% low of 44, and a 0.1% low of 37. A few little issues in and around Armadillo, which is the first town that you're going to encounter. Alternatively, Windows 11 hit 81 frames per second, so not a massively significant difference, but where we saw the biggest improvement was with the percentile lows, 69 and 64 here, so it was far smoother with Windows. Finally, we have Mafia Definitive Edition. Again, all of these games today were just picked at random. They're all fairly modern releases, but I just thought I'd pick out a few to see how well they did. Now here performance swings back in the favour of SteamOS, 67 FPS with a 1% low of 52 and 49. This felt really smooth and solid to play, and I absolutely love this remake. Visually I think it still holds up well despite being a few years old, and I very much enjoy visiting this one from time to time. Now compared to Windows 11 we saw 66 FPS, so again very similar average, but with this, the percentile lows were a little lower, 51 as that 1% low, which isn't really any different. The biggest change was with that 0.1% figure, 43 FPS compared to 49. Not massive, but I noticed the occasional little hiccup with Windows, whereas I didn't with SteamOS. Now while the RX 590 performed better under Windows 11 in most cases today, at least in my random selection of games, it's worth noting that this isn't the only way to enjoy Linux. As I said before, there are lots of distros to choose from, ones designed around a desktop environment instead of handheld. I thought it was worth testing SteamOS first, as it is probably going to be the one that a lot of people who are new to Linux may consider first for its gaming focused interface and simplicity. Now as a side note, it's far less resource intensive than Windows 11. Here's a quick example from The Last of Us, but this is basically the same for every game. The VRAM usage was slightly lower with Steam, but the system RAM usage was significantly lower. Now that didn't really help us out today in our gaming results, but it does mean that we could perhaps get more out of a system equipped with less RAM. As it was, desktop mode felt super fast with this i7 and 32GB rig, far snappier than Windows when browsing the web and watching videos. Not to mention that there are many different graphics cards out there, all of which will produce different results, not only from within SteamOS but also in comparison to Windows. And I think if you want to install SteamOS on an AMD graphics card, you're going to have a decent time, especially if your intentions are purely gaming focused. But that's all for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Leave your thoughts down below, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next video.